Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to the latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Last Defense of the First Hands, written by PerilousPlatypus. Wex was a craggy bastard. Last his ma had seen of him, she'd pronounced him twice rotted to his core and thoroughly beyond redemption. Half his words were curses, and the other half were barked orders. There might have been more overlap between the two, but most of the recruits knew better than to point that out. Some for fear of his tongue, but mostly because we all knew he was just trying to keep us alive. And he'd beat us to death if that's what it took to get the job done. Their wastes weren't a place for day trippers and casuals. It was a place for folks that either had too much to give or nothing left to take. Nothing in between. Wex was a first hand. He'd been holding the line since it was first drawn up. He'd even tried to move that line forward a few times. Some even said that he fought his way to within shitting distance of the blasted hole, but who knew what was true and when it came to any of them? All of the first hands were legends in their own time, and separating the real from the myth was folly. And I'd rather believe all of it. It made all of it seem possible. Like the feckery coming out of the gate was the thing that could be solved. That this was just one big long war of attrition where we're doomed just cause we feck slower than they spawn. His eyes settled on me now. Scars, old and new, crisscrossed his forehead, breaking up the grayed out bushy brown brows perched above his eyes, giving the glower. I was fairly certain I was about to get some smoked to pieces. "Did you hear me, muckfucker?" Fecker was my newly assigned name bestowed upon me after a particularly unfortunate slip during a training exercise. Among my friends, I went by Rast. I didn't have friends here, so it was mostly Fecker. There wasn't much love for black robes on the line. Folks tended to think it was a black robe that started this whole mess in the first place, though it had never been proven. Black magic was a path to demonology, but it wasn't the only route it traveled. I was a chaostician, something well away from gate dabbling. The patch on my robe showed 2 dice, both with a single pip. The Devil's Eyes. Not a great nickname, given the circumstances. It certainly didn't help convince anyone that I spent precisely 0 time trying to figure out how to pierce the plains and call forth the abyssal beyond. Prejudice was always hard to shake, particularly when it had an easy target. Back to the present. "Sir, no, sir." There was no use lying. Wex could smell it, best to own up to it and take what was coming. It was better than having a song and dance about it first. It only made it worse. He held the stare. "And why, fecker of muck, were you not listening?" "Because I'm an idiot," I thought. "Because I'm an idiot," I said. His shoulders slumped slightly, and he exhaled, turning to look at the rest of my squad. "You 5 will be deployed in under a week. Set out of the bastion and straight up the arsehole of the wastes. If any of you make it back, it'll be because," his eyes bored into me now, "fecking pay attention. Do you understand?" "Sir, yes, sir," all of us echoed. I could feel the hate emanating off my squad mates. All of them had been selected for my benefit, and none of them was happy about it. They were amongst the elite, come to the wall in hopes of gaining glory and honor for all their families and patrons. Instead, they were glorified babysitters of a black robe. 2 exorcists, a guardian, and a medicant, all highly skilled, all for my benefit. I stifled a sigh and kept my back straight. There was nothing to be done about it. None of it had been any of our choice. It wasn't like I wanted to be here. It wasn't like I wanted to be wearing robes at all, much less black ones. We were a product of our fate and our time. Wex jabbed a finger into my chest, pushing through the thin cloth and jabbing against the skin beneath. "Their lives are tied to you. They exist so you can continue existing. Do them a fecking favor and be less of a shithead." "Yes, sir." His finger moved from my chest to a barrel behind him. "Toss the dice until you've got eyes." I swallowed. "Yes, sir." He turned away. "The rest of you are dismissed." I stood tall, my eyes trained ahead as my squad mates broke formation and made their way back to the barracks. A few cast sidelong glances, but all of them knew better than to say anything while Wex was still there. Once they had departed, Wex spoke up again. I won't be there to save you out there, Rast. It's nothing but endless hell, filled to the brim with those feckers. I've spent my life going out there and coming back. More often than not, I come back with fewer than I came out with. You know what the difference was between those folks that came back and those who didn't. He paused, looking over his shoulders at me now. They stayed focused. Always. Yes, sir. He drew in a long breath and seemed about to say something. Instead, he shook his head and stomped over to the barrel, kicking it over. Thousands of dice tumbled out, all shapes, sizes, and sides. He picked one up and held it outwards to me. All eyes! Start if you miss. Yes, sir. Focus, I nodded. Yes, sir. He returned my nod and then tossed the dice in my direction. I felt it tumble through the air, felt the chaotic forces at play as it spun. All of these factors and influences colliding together into a noisy cacophony, vying for control. I reached out for the dice, snatching it out of the air. I closed my fingers around it and then slowly opened it up. There, in the center of my palm, sat the dice, a single pip facing up. That's a start, Wex said. Then he turned and was gone, leaving me there in the gathering twilight with a spilled barrel of dice and a long night ahead. Preparations to depart appeared on the surface as a noisy, chaotic affair. I knew better. For all of the bustle and activity, it was a well-ordered procession. Each task moved in a logical chain, slotted in alongside numerous other ones. This was not the first time the bastion had disgorged its contents into the wastes. For the servants of the bastion, this was a time-honored and honed practice. I stood in my place and watched it play out. With every passing moment, more resources made their way to our squad's wagon, filling it with all the necessities for survival and the practice of our crafts. I required precious few inputs beyond a steady supply of sustenance and mana potions. The Exorcist, Glandarin, and Lancella watched the loading of the casks with hawkish attention. Each carried a supply of holy water, thrice purified and twice blessed. It was the most precious of our wagon's cargo and took up much of the allotted weight. It was quite unusual to have two exorcists in the same squad. Ideally, a paladin would be present, but the exorcists were twins and inseparable. They were also noteworthy for their power, which was how they came to be assigned to the Devil's Squad. I had chosen that name for our squad. We were officially named South 4, but apparently it didn't have the same ring to it. Glandarin and Lancella, both devout ecclesiasts, were as enthusiastic about the name as they were about me personally. Not very. Our guardian, Bang, stood silently to the side. Most of what he needed he carried on him, in that form of his bulwark armor and massive tower shield. He'd acquired his name from the battle cry he issued whenever he slammed someone or something with his shield. He was a simple sort, but devastatingly effective. Bang was the closest I'd gotten to a friend since I had arrived, mostly on account of the fact that he was friendly with everyone. A few feet away was Wisty, our mendicant. Spread across the ground before her was countless herbs, poultices, rune books, and other implements of her trade. She was slowly conducting her fourth inventory, her nimble fingers touching each object and saying its name before moving to the next one. Occasionally, she would slightly shift one, moving it into alignment with some internally held set of rules that only she could perceive. I watched her quietly for a moment, admiring the absence of chaos in her work. I wish I could see the rules at play governing her effort, but that was not in the nature of my gift. It was a rare gift for a person to engage in much of anything without chaos creeping in along the edges. She turned and glared at me, causing me to jump. "What?" she asked. "Sorry, it's nothing," I stammered. "I was just admiring." Wisty flushed slightly and raised my hands up in front of me, waving them back and forth. "Sorry, no, not like that. I mean, I was just watching your inventory. It's very precise." Her eyes narrowed and her flush deepened. "Yes, well, now that you've interrupted, I'll need to start over." She clenched her hands reflexively. "Don't you have something better to be doing than gawk at me?" I shrugged. Not really, no." The thing I needed more than anything else was the presence of chaos, something that would be in no short supply in the wastes beyond. I needed noise and disaster and the tangled jumble of a million things colliding into one another. More chaos increased the range of possibilities. and with it my ability to select the outcome. I needed range, volatility, pretty much precisely all of the things of all my squad mates were attempting to prepare for and remove from existence. I figured it was best not to mention that. Instead, I gestured towards the wagon. My pots are already loaded. You're gonna get us all killed, she replied. I had little to say to that. She was probably right. She gave me one last meaningful glare and then turned back to her inventory, heaving a great sigh as she began again. I made a studied effort to look anywhere but her, willing the time to pass until our departure. I was in no great hurry to enter the wastes, but I saw little point in delaying it either. We had a job to do, and the sword would hang above our heads until we got it done. This would be their commencement tour, 30 days out of the South Gate. Push and purge, recapture and reconsecrate the Southern Vanguard if possible, though that was considered unlikely. The Southern Vanguards had been lost over a decade ago, and it seemed wildly unlikely a new squad would uproot the daemon who had taken them. Still, more seemed possible with the chaotician involved, at least as far as command was concerned. It had been some time since a Fate Turner had been trained and brought to Bastion. Lucky me, I guess. Odd that, no matter how hard I tried, I'd been unable to dislodge this particular fate for myself. Given my line of work, I wasn't given to believing in destiny, but this entire affair reeked of it. Well, no changing it now. Time slid by. I lost myself in the flow of things, tossing a pair of 20-sided dice up in the air and snatching them. Devil's eyes, over and over again. Focus, always focus. I had to listen to Wex. He'd been in my shoes 1,000 times and come back 1,000 times. In the background, a loud gong rang. Once, twice, thrice. Slowly, the southern gate began to crank open, revealing the desolation beyond. Feck me. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Dragzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.